Welcome back to the daily discussion. All right, so yesterday I left it at discussing different transitions I incurred during the military and how oftentimes returning from a deployment, the transition from the deployment itself back to being with your family was one of the hardest transitions that military members make. And it's often the one that most people aren't ever coached or talked to about. Now, here's why this is important. While the military member is deployed, returning for both you and your family members is very difficult. Why? Because you've both been living different lives that entire time. Just because the military member is the one who's gone, the family members are at home doing their own routines too without that member. Now, when that member returns, everything gets thrown on edge. So if there's kids involved, the kids may be shy. So for me, my daughter didn't want to come to me anymore when I first got back. Every single deployment, when I'd return, she wouldn't come to me for a while. Now, the first time that was very difficult. And then we found incremental ways to introduce her back to me to get back into her knowing who I was, I guess. Now, some of that was just my wife sitting close to me with her, and then eventually hearing me talk or just sitting there and letting her approach me. So there's many different ways that you could do it, but it's again something that we didn't ever plan because we didn't realize it was a thing. Now, between my wife and I, it was a little bit easier. Why? Because we communicated. The hardest part really was getting used to the laundry routine again, and maybe toilet seats. That's always a battle between husbands and wives. Things like that, or maybe dishes or whatever, like those little things that the spouse wouldn't have had going on, and you may have had a different routine while deployed. So those things can be worked through very easily, but frequently you don't realize they need to be. Another part of that is also depending on what the deployment was. Traffic and stuff like that becomes a very big issue that's not talked about, because if you're, say, in a war zone and you're driving in convoys, you don't stop for anything. So all of a sudden you get to driving in civilian traffic again and there's traffic around you. It could be very unnerving because you're not used to that. So again, all these little things often aren't really discussed in detail and kind of like talk through. And if that member doesn't approach somebody and kind of bring up the fact that these little things are getting on their nerves and irritating, it can be a big problem. So again, how does this tie back into healthy eating habits and stuff like that? It's always the same thing. It's a bunch of incremental things that you have to recognize where the deficiencies are, where the lack of communication is, and where you lack skills at, and then build on those incrementally to then address the whole picture. So anyway, if that's interesting to you, reach out. Let's have a conversation.